pre-show. And
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this year it does seem that way. I guess it's uh, lots of things to deal with. It's like you hope the finals, you've got your player, you wish it was all kind of just okay, let's just play the players and let's do it. And now with all injuries and all this other, like whatever the Raiders are doing, setting down their good people and all sorts of stuff happening, it's hard to figure out exactly, the vibes of each game is, what is really happening here. It's very strange, and I know there are incentives and things, and I've really never paid attention to that, but it just seems like a lot of that is bubbling to the top this year, and I don't remember it so much. The frothiness of all this, it seems much higher, I guess, is the word I'm describing. So that means my choices are on edge. With that last flex, I find myself flipping,
oh yeah,
and flopping back and forth. Okay, I like that, but then I like that one. And then if this one's out, then I mean, it's just, I don't know. I just remember in past, the finals seem to be a little bit more like, here's my studs, there's your studs, let's do it. And you hope it
yes.
all works out. And it doesn't seem to be the case this year.
One thing I'm wondering, and I'm always trying to find the answers to what is going on, and you know, sometimes the answers are not as obvious. And again, it reminds me so much of weather forecasting. This big
Right.
storm that was hitting the East Coast. I'm watching the news yesterday and watching some of the stuff, and I hear they're expecting 8 to 11 inches of snow for New York City.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at the way this storm is coming, and the only way New York City traditionally gets a foot of snow
Mhm.
is with a perfectly placed nor'easter. And this was not. This was a storm going west to east. It was a warm advection storm, not a big, closed low nor'easter that was just perfectly off the coast and all that. Because of its location, New York City needs almost a perfect storm to get a foot of snow. Chicago can get a foot of snow in a lot of different scenarios. New
Mhm.
York City, it's very precise, but there was one of the models, one of the weather models that was chewing out that much precipitation. And I'm looking at the models and I'm saying, the only way you're getting that total from this storm is if it mixes in. And
Mhm.
then, there's sleet with the snow and it drops the snow amounts tremendously. And so somebody asked me that yesterday, and I was like, because they were supposed to fly to New York for the
Mhm.
weekend. And I said, well, you know, the airline's going to cancel like crazy because there's forecast of a foot of snow, but I think they're going to get like 4 or 5. And I use just meatball meteorology. That's the way I learned. If a storm is going this direction and the snow is going to last this long of a time, here's how much snow you're going to get. It was based on statistics over many, many years and not as precise as what the models are trying to do. And in fantasy football, I think we sometimes make that same mistake where we're trying to get too technical on everything. And at the same time, we're dealing with what has happened in the past and what we can count on. And what we can usually count on is, like you say, players playing out the season for incentives on bad teams. And then the playoff teams may be resting guys once their seed is determined. But otherwise, they're going for it in week 17. Week 18 is off the boards, but that's why fantasy football doesn't have a week 18 finals any, if you're sane. But I think when we look at and we compare history, we're still comparing too much of the history that was a 16 game schedule instead of 17.
Yep.
Are we seeing coaches react different because it's 17? Are we seeing, Christmas Day years ago, you turn the clock and remember that was the playoffs were around Christmas weekend between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
It was always the fantasy, it was the real football playoffs, and we're not even starting playoffs now until January.
Right.
So if a guy gets hurt, on the old 16-week season when they started a little earlier, if a guy got hurt in week 16, they were still ready to go week one usually, right? Now the season's so elongated with bye weeks and everything else. I mean, when we had a 14-week season, you never worried about these things. The season was over. You had the playoffs were done. Super Bowl was first week of February, and you were done. Now the season has been elongated so much. I think we're just starting to understand how people are going to react, because they're paying big money for these players now. They weren't on these multi-year guaranteed contracts until a few years ago. Now, if you want to keep your great guys, you got to give them some guaranteed money for 3 years. If you got guaranteed money out for a guy and you're out of the playoff run and you got to pay that big salary next year, you don't want that guy hurt. You're going to shut him down.
Yep.
I'm almost wondering, not that the NFL is ever going to do things to help out fantasy football, but week 14 can't be a bye week anymore. Like, they should stop the bye weeks at week 12. And then fantasy football could go ahead and change to a week 16 final. Just like, the old days,
Right.
And, those 2 weeks at the end will just be a waste, but there's DFS, people can still have fun with that. Heck, people are playing DFS for preseason games now. I mean, that's how crazy people are getting. But I wonder if we've gotten to a point, though, where we need to, as a fantasy football industry, we need to say, you know what? Even if playoffs start week 14 and there are bye weeks, that when you're drafting guys. So good luck. If you want to take a chance, good luck. If you wrap up a first round bye, you don't have to worry about week 14 buys. But I'm almost thinking fantasy football needs to switch to a week 16 championship.
They, some leagues, they have a 2-week championship.
Yes.
You don't, and it could do that. It could certainly have that happen, and just the top 4 battle on week 15, week 16. Then there's your situation. There's a lot of formats. I'm just surprised that they haven't considered some of those before. Top 4 is fine with me. I think the sites think they'll make more money with a longer playoff.
Yeah.
People are more interested if they're in 5th and 6th place, and especially people in 8th, 9th, coming into the playoffs, they think they got a shot at slipping in there in the 6th spot. So it keeps tension and keeps the excitement going. So I think there is some of that as well. I'm not, I think we're thinking as players, not thinking as people that
Yes.
run
Yes.
these, that have
Yes.
money invested.
Yeah.
So I think it might be a while before we might see some type of change, like no bye weeks in week 14. Or I think we're coming from the player's perspective, and having been at the racetrack for years, it always seems like from the player's perspective, there were some really good ideas on wagers and how things happen, and the speed of the between the races and all this other thing. But the jockeys, the train, they see it different. They're
Yeah.
yeah, and so the players kind of come last in a lot of these kind of situations, just like kind of the fans come last. I mean, look at Kansas City leaving Arrowhead. I mean, the
Yeah.
fans probably are not happy about that, but nobody's really their input in that equation is not viable. I mean, nobody really you can't you won't come out and say that, but nobody cares, Dennis.
No,
They
well,
got money to make.
this is it. And I had a great discussion with a bunch of Chiefs fans and one that's been a season ticket holder for damn near 30 years. And their big concern is if they're going to be priced out of tickets, and
Yes.
I can understand that. And, my comment though was very analytical. It was stadiums have a life. And the response back from this lady, because she was actually a structural engineer, is what she does for a living. And she said, no, all the studies and all the inspections have said that this place can go for another 40 years. And I said, no, it's not the structural integrity. It's maximizing the amount of revenue that a place can generate.
Yeah.
You cannot have a lot of concerts, even in the summertime, at Arrowhead. They do have some, but they have to end them by July so you can have the field in shape to play games in August and then, for the whole season. Versus an indoor stadium where you can park the turf like they do,
Hmm.
at Vegas and Arizona, where they literally slide the turf out and, slide a floor in. They could do events year round at
Right.
these facilities. And I feel for the fans that have been going to Arrowhead for a long time. And I can understand why they'd be upset. But, do they also say to their boss, "Hey, I'll work for a little less. I don't have a problem with that." If that,
Yeah.
I mean, people are always trying to maximize their earnings, and that's exactly what the Chiefs are trying to do. Kansas thinks they can make money off this deal, or they wouldn't be offering these tax incentives, the incentives up front. They know they're going to make that money, 5 times, 10 times that money in additional revenue on bringing people to this facility, and the tax revenue that will generate, and the hotel and everything else, all of the restaurant revenue around this place. They think it's going to be successful. Will it? I don't know. I'm not an economist, but I know that cities are very active in trying to go after a team if one's available. But these stadiums, I mean, look at the only reason Arrowhead lasted this long is because they didn't build it like a multi-purpose stadium like a Three Rivers.
Mhm.
or the stadium in Cincinnati. Remember when they were baseball and football stadiums in the same building?
Yes.
And Busch Stadium did that years ago. It didn't work. Like it wasn't optimal for the fans. So the trend was to build individual football and baseball stadiums. Kansas City was way ahead of the curve, putting
Right.
Royal Stadium and Arrowhead on the same basic property, sharing parking lot space.
Right.
It was brilliant, but they can only update a stadium that much, and maximizing that revenue, having it domed, having it, available for a Super Bowl. There won't ever be a Super Bowl at Arrowhead.
Nope.
There won't ever be a Final Four at Arrowhead. And, it, but there's always going to be change. We always are resistant to that change. But from a fantasy football standpoint, if it continues, if week 17 continues to be this much of a train wreck, because I'm convinced there's more chaos this week 17 than we've ever had.
It seems that way.
It seems that way. And I understand some of that is recency bias. We're going to do a little study in the offseason to see if there indeed have been more missed games.
Yeah.
But, like Max Crosby is 100% healthy.
Yeah.
For relatively, speaking. I mean, every football player's got their aches and pains after 16 games, but they shut him down.
Yeah. Just like
and he got pissed. He was like,
"Oh yeah,
I don't want to do this. I owe it to the fans to go out there and play." I mean, I give him a lot of credit for saying that, because that's not, in the NFL, you go against what ownership wants, and that's not always a healthy move.
yeah,
But, it's happening with so many players. Jaden Daniels got shut down early.
yeah."
And if this is the trend going forward, as fantasy football players, our strategy needs to adapt.
What strategy do we think then benefits? That's what I'm not sure of.
Yeah, and it's not as easy as saying, "Oh, well, I'm just going to draft guys that I think are going to be from playoff teams."
That kind of thing.
Detroit seemed like a lock for the playoffs.
Yeah.
Commanders should have had a good season, right? Before the injuries started. Obviously, the Chiefs not making the playoffs, and Chiefs being out 2 weeks before the end of the season, is a shocker. Like nobody, there were people that predicted that the Chiefs might miss the playoffs. Of course, they've done that the last 3 years.
Right.
But I don't think it's that easy to tell who's going to make the playoffs, who isn't.
Right.
And then it's very difficult to decide. I mean, Dallas has big money on Dak Prescott. They haven't shut him down.
No.
So how do you predict that? I don't know. That's the tough part. But the strategy needs to be, we're definitely drafting 2 quarterbacks. We're definitely drafting 2 tight ends. That might be the best strategy adaptation to these new times that we can do, because we can't figure out who's going to be in the playoffs, who's going to be shut down.
Right.
But if I take 2 really good quarterbacks, if I aim to have 2 guys that are going to finish in the top 12, it gives me a little wiggle room, more so than just injuries. And same with tight ends. I mean, if you drafted Brock Bowers, you probably didn't draft another tight end, or if you did, you drafted one really late, right?
Right.
You know, that maybe the strategy is to handcuff your quarterback and tight end late in the season. But is Mayer as good as Brock Bowers?
Nope.
You could have probably done better with a backup.
Right.
But what this does is anytime we see change, and remember, like 2 years ago, I said that I think this switch to 17 games is going to change the way running backs are used.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen that. I think we're seeing more split backfields than ever before. The number of guys that are getting over 20 touches a week has dropped off. We know that. But how do we react to these other things? That's tough, because I don't know, was this a predictable outcome this year? Probably not.
It's I start thinking about proportion of RBs, WRs, as you say, quarterbacks and tight ends. I think that is what we could consider. We've been leaning more to having more running backs and less wide receivers.
Yes.
So we just need to I think in the offseason just double check, triple check that idea. In principle, I understand there's variation. Value comes up. You can't walk away from a sixth bet, wide receiver that has potential to, maybe a rookie or something that man could be coming on late. It's hard to walk away from that potential, but we have been traditionally with this better than zero going more running backs later. And, maybe is that hurting us in this new environment? I don't know yet. In other words, just as we thought we figured it out, maybe we need to refigure a little more,
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's fair. And maybe the answer is, maybe the answer isn't so much the draft, but how you
the
pivot
waivers
by like week 10.
Yeah, the waivers and in your kind of a strategy longer term than week to week.
Yes. Yeah,
That
I
could
think
be
that
something to consider.
yeah, I think that might be. And but remember, even better than zero is evolved, because
Mhm.
when it started, I said, once you got 4 wide receivers that you're comfortable with starting,
No,
you're done.
I'm thinking 5 these days.
I'm really thinking that the true answer might be 6.
Yeah, that's what I'm
May,
saying too.
might be 8 running backs, 6 wide receivers. That's a 20. We have that 20-man
Mhm.
roster.
Mhm.
You got to have
Kicker,
one kicker,
defense.
one defense. So if you go 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, 1 kicker, 1 defense,
Yep,
you got 14 slots left.
yep. So 8 and 6.
8 and 6, I think, is, and again, like everything that we have ever done, we never hold to a hard and fast, never break this rule type thing. So if we luck into 7 or 8 wide receivers by the end of the season because of waivers,
Mhm.
who cares if it's flipped? I just want 2 running backs that are viable at the end of this season.
Right.
And if you got 4, great. That makes your team decisions real easy. But yeah, instead of, my typical teams were 4 and 8 with 2 quarterbacks, maybe 3 tight ends, because we're tight end premium. And now maybe it's 2 8 6 2 1 1 is the breakdown by position. And if you end up going 7 and 7 or seven running backs and 3 tight ends, who cares? But the basic idea is maybe we need one more wide receiver than we thought we had, than we thought we needed, or one more tight end. I mean, maybe the answer is 7 6 3 tight ends. I don't know, but it leads itself, I think, to some interesting research, because we can look at where our teams failed this year and see if there was a structural failure or if it was just an injury failure.
Yeah. I think that's a way to start, is look at the structure. What teams survived. I would put it into, let's say, three buckets. The top 3 or 4, the next 3 or 4, and then the rest, kind of thing, and just kind of see structurally the teams that sorted themselves out. Where did they end up in a structural way? Is there some, and you could even measure by ratio. You could even measure by maybe MVP, Dennis, or consistency metrics. In other words, if you have 2 that are extreme consistent, then can you live with 4 spiky, inconsistent, or some? In other words, what we say the word structure is like sleeper. What does that really mean?
Correct.
We need to dig around it and think about what if there seems to be some structural difference, then what is that? What is the word structure? What is the optimum structure? And I don't know, clarity wise. It may take a few seasons to focus on that. Of course, then they'll add a 18, or add a European tour or something. I keep waiting for that, is where they do, say, 19 or 20, have more, double bye weeks, and figure out a way to send like teams over to Europe or somewhere and let them play 2 or 3 weeks in a row, then give them kind of a bye before and a bye after. Let them have a Europe run, but then, blanking it with a rest week coming back to the US. It wouldn't surprise me in a few years we're dealing with some metrics like that, and that's going to change things too.
I wouldn't be shocked to see a team that is not drawing well or is in a smaller market where their income is capped actually become a European team.
Yeah, or something like that.
And every team that is sent over there either plays on Monday night the following week, or has a bye.
Yeah, or some type of bye. And like I said, even a double bye situation.
Would not shock me if we expand 18 weeks with 2 byes.
Yeah, or something like that.
And then we have to reformulate what we're doing again. The biggest difficulty that I see is we used to have the bye weeks more condensed.
Yes.
Now we've got them spread out. And at one point, there were always the same number of teams on bye. And now you have weeks with 2, weeks with 6. I mean, to me, it's very chaotic the way they're doing it, which tells me that they don't care about fantasy football, which is fine, because fantasy football shouldn't be depending, they shouldn't be making rules to make our lives easier playing fantasy football. That's not the goal of the NFL.
Right.
I think the there's a benefit obviously there for I think fantasy football boosts the interest of the NFL. But if there wasn't any fantasy football, there'd still be plenty of interest in the NFL.
Yes, I agree
I
with
just
that.
I just think things like NFL Red Zone are more popular because of fantasy football.
I think so too. I agree.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
have we beaten this to death?
yeah, I think we have. I just, I like to take a moment in time to talk about the philosophical part of the game
Mhm.
because I think that's so underserved. And I don't think people are even thinking in that direction. And
Mm-mm.
it's not like I'm anticipating that we can change the minds of people to think in that way. But I think when we talk about this, it helps our own personal research. And here, week 17, we're really starting to think, more about what we're doing in the off season. And I've already got a laundry list. And I think what I'm going to do here in the next week is go back through my notebook where I've been keeping notes every week on different things that we have suggested
Mhm.
and compile a master list so we can have a week or two to say, okay, which are the most important things to attack here in the off season, in addition to the stuff we're already going to do.
Yes.
So, this next week I'll probably get um, my career MVP look done,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to go past guys that were active from 2020 because that gives us enough data.
Mhm.
And I think you go back much farther. I mean, we're talking about how the game has changed because of going to 17 weeks.
Right.
The game is changing a lot every year. The game of football is changing, and I think it's impacting fantasy football with, just at running back, the drop in volume alone. If nothing else changed, the way they're using running backs would change the output and change the MVP scores on guys. So if you go back much farther than 2020, when it comes to running backs, I think the data becomes less meaningful. But and that study is being done more as a forecast tool for myself. I want to know if a guy finished the season year one with an 80 MVP, what's he likely to do? What has been the past? What in the past has a guy who scored an 80 in a full season? What has he done? What are the range of outcomes for year two? And that I think is going to give me more insight when it comes to forecasting. The ironic thing this year, professors, I think my forecasting of MVPs got better, but it didn't show up in the ROI.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if, I understand that concept and now I need to work more on, obviously that forecast is important, but understanding the drop offs and understanding the guys that, you know, maybe I'll look at the data and say, you know what, year 9 running backs, it's so rare for them to succeed that you just don't want to invest in any of them. That might be, or might be year 7 even. It might be even year 6. I don't know what the number is going to be, but the data will guide me to that answer of understanding the risk as players get older. And I'm convinced that at running back, every hit that these guys takes a toll in their ability. And I've seen even great running backs whose career has declined quickly. And that's scary. And in fantasy football, just like in a baseball trade, the baseball general managers say, I'd rather be a year early than a year late trading away an older player. I'm thinking we want to do the same thing. We want to know, okay, what is the prime years of investing in these guys? And maybe even if Kamara, a guy like Alvin Kamara hasn't had a decline, we know the odds are against him. So, and that doesn't matter whether it was caused by injuries or a decline in ability.
Well,
Because
it adds value later. I mean, it drops they're in the draft round, and so
correct,
at some point, it's still we're in other words, what round is it worth a player like you described?
correct, correct.
Where is that point where it's worth a shot? Defining draft capital value, that's part of this equation too.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct because next year, I don't care that it'll be his 10th season in the NFL. If Christian McCaffrey drops to the early part of round 3 and he's healthy in preseason, you like it's an automatic. In the first round, though, I don't know if I could touch him again.
Yeah.
And I would rather be wrong in a guy in round 1 because the guy that you're getting, if there's, if you're not falling one off, you can never predict injuries.
Right.
Okay. So if a guy like a Malik Neighbors goes down with an injury, that's just luck of the draw. And I'm not going to avoid players based on their potential for injury. Although I will say the older players, you've got 2 problems. One, they seem to no longer be as reliable for a full season. And number 2, they have a decline in ability. That's 2 strikes against a guy. Where do we, this whole red flag idea, like we wouldn't have drafted Kamara in the first 3 rounds.
Nope.
But there came a point where he was just too good of a shot at taking. And we need to define those in our strategies better.
Yes.
And understand where those are. Is it, is this just 1 red flag? Is it 2 at, and it varies by position because there appears to be more problems for running. Looking at running backs and looking at this career arc of guys, it's scary because there's some guys that I thought were better for longer, like James White.
Yeah.
James White seems like a player who was around forever for the New England Patriots, right?
Right.
He had 3 full seasons and then 2 injury full seasons. And that was it, out of the league after 5 years. I would have said, oh, he had at least an 8 or 9 year arc.
Mm-hmm.
And at least 4 or 5 really good years. He had 2 good years. It's weird how the brain processes that. And then a guy like James Conner, who is still at his peak going into this year.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kinds of guys. I think we can get a draft capital guess on players based on the career arcs of players. Because even an Adrian Peterson, he felt like he was a great fantasy football asset forever, right?
Yes.
He had 5 good years. Out of a 12-year career, he had 5 good seasons. But he seemed like he was a fixture forever. And we might have been drafting him as that, thinking he was going to have a bounce back. And these guys never bounce back. Like, that's the scary part of the old NFL, not for long. And, that really hits with every single player. And then there's guys, though, like Derrick Henry. He'll have a decline this year. how are they using this guy? Like, it's they scored a touchdown with him to go ahead. Still had a lot of game left and didn't use him for another touch last week.
That was weird.
Very weird and healthy as can be. So there's some usage issues that I think come into play as well that make it hard to forecast because we don't get to call the plays. We don't know what the coach's trends are going to be. And last year he was riding Henry with high volume. And this year, and they were a lock for the playoffs. Okay. He was still riding them heavy. This year, they're more of a risk to miss the playoffs, and they're not mysteriously not using him as much. I can't figure it
out. It makes me want to start doing research. your discussion, because it just allows me to think a little bit, and we probably should pontificate earlier than we usually do. I don't know when we do. It just sometimes studies happen and then more questions jump out, so I understand that. But I like that MVP as a method of a career arc, because I do the age studies, and we went over some of that data, updated, and we could do it some more. But there's things to consider there as well. But the 16, the 17 game, the 18 games down the road, 19, 20, I think that's going to have a play too. So even as we understand what is and is going to be is changing, right? It's the floor is getting slippery again. And, that's part of it. And I can understand people that are just kind of show up during the, season, draft a team, and then things are changing. They can't figure it out anymore. And it must all be luck. I can understand that thinking. But looking like we try to look at it, there's just a lot of pieces trying to put together. And it's always right outside my grasp. It's just a little bit out there. And that's all I can do is just try to keep up with it. But I think we need to kind of have some sessions like this. It would be nice if we had some more different opinions, Dennis. That would definitely help, trying to get people to come in and ask their questions that might inspire other answers and studies and whatnot. And I'm hoping our posters at the expo will allow that to, maybe to germinate. I don't know.
and maybe what we need to do in the off season is come up with a list of topics and invite one of the people we know from fantasy football Twitter, the Mike Reedies, the Zaraz, the Joe Carltons of the world, GC, Greg Kellogg, some of these guys, both, old time, like I have a feeling if with the context that we've made in the past year, if we reach out to a Jim Coventry, to a Bob Harris, to a JJ Zakarison, and we say, hey, look, guys, here's what we want to do. We want to have you join us on a Wednesday afternoon or evening, and we're going to call it Fantasy Football Roundtable. We're going to send you 3 topics to discuss. And Lord knows we will have more than enough topics. And maybe we send them 5 and let them choose the 3 they want to talk about. Because I know people like to prepare in advance, unlike us who like to just shoot from the hip.
Yeah.
But maybe that would be a good way to sort of get the finger on the pulse of some of these folks who are pretty smart minds, because we have with the group that we know through Asylum Football and through TSA and through the other contacts we've made at, guys at Football Guys and that who know who the heck we are now. I think they might sit down for a very condensed 30-minute chat and pick their brains. And that might be great for us to do in the off season to kind of get an idea of areas and topics that we haven't considered yet for research.
It's always good to think about things that others are thinking about that we're not thinking. It's like we hadn't even considered that idea.
And you don't know what people are, what their concerns are until you talk to them, because a lot of times they won't even discuss this. Some of this stuff is going to be what I would call next level thinking.
Yeah.
It's stuff that people might be curious about, but they might not even really have gotten a real firm idea that this is something that other people are interested in. And maybe if we do a little bit of roundtable discussions, we might figure some of these things out, because again, the scientific concept is to bring some great minds together. If we bring great minds together, I think we're going to have some smarter ways to attack stuff going forward. And there might be some people that surprise us that are thinking about similar things, but just don't have the time to really invest, or just don't want to take the time to invest to do the research, but might, they might want to do some or hear about some research as well. I don't know, but it's certainly worth taking a look at.
Yes, I agree. I think they're, and I'm not sure, polls and quick. So I've got some ideas. I think the topics, but then I think to start, Dennis, sometimes it's best to poll people. What are they thinking?
Yes.
And we have with the Zoom, I can do a poll. I can put a poll up there, Dennis.
I like it.
And
I like that.
So a topic, and then put some choices and just see what people are thinking. Sometimes it's good just to kind of see where people are at before you dive into it. Kind of what's the ground level of thinking about a certain topic? Because I'm not sure. I don't know if I know all. I think I might know, but I may not. Know what most people are thinking. So you have to design the poll pretty good. But we used to do that in our strategic planning. We would actually get ideas. People would actually generate ideas. We'd put them in a poll and people vote on them. And then we talk some more about them. We kind of start fleshing them out. And you find what most people are thinking about. And then the ideas that are kind of out there, you don't throw those away, but at least you see what's being concentrated on, and it allows you to look at the extreme thinking and ask the question, is there anything here that we're missing? The versus this is what a lot of people are thinking. groupthink versus pushing the envelope. So you can use polls that way as well.
Yeah, and I think if we use that group of experts concept, where we're not asking the general public, we're asking
Yeah.
15 or 20 experts that we know, and the great thing is we've got the exposure to that many smart people now.
Yeah.
Whereas 3 years ago, outside of our little group with fake pigskin,
Mm-hmm.
our and some of the OGs that we knew from the past and
Yeah.
whatnot. I mean, could you imagine if we had a chance to dissect the brain of a fantasy Taz before he
Mm-hmm.
passed away? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a guy that it's so much knowledge, and even though he had been around for a long time, seemed to really keep up with the changes. He had a dynamic way of thinking about the game that I think is sometimes lacking in today's group of so-called experts. I mean, I don't want to,
No,
name names,
no,
but
don't do
I
that.
I think there are some that are, again, it's this concept of great at making noise versus great at analyzing the data.
Yeah.
And some of the noisemakers though might surprise us with their depth of knowledge. They just don't display it every
Mhm.
day.
Yeah.
Or they're working on stuff that is so beneficial
Mhm.
that they might not even want to share what they're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah,
about.
that's some secret
That's
stuff.
secret sauce,
Yeah.
but anyway, it's food for thought. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, we're not going to shut up during the off season, folks. There's no,
No, no,
oh, the grind's over. We can't wait to rest.
no, no.
No,
I got to
no.
build. First thing I'll be doing is consolidating all the data
Yeah,
base, updating all of it, having databases and potentially making new ones, and then start hitting some of these questions that I'm interested in. That's what I'll be doing in January. We'll be watching games and we'll be doing a show a week, on the playoffs. May have to go to Fridays, Dennis. I don't know
yeah, yeah. That might
if,
work.
with the playoffs on Saturdays and Sundays, we might have to do that.
No, that's a good idea, and that works fine with me.
Hmm.
I think our Wednesday visits are more theory
Yeah,
than hard data, and I
yeah.
think those should continue. And we should
Hmm.
probably continue. Like I said, we should probably, change that our Saturday matchup lab to a data lab,
Yeah.
and use that from the philosophical standpoint to talk about some of the research that is going on. My first thing that I'll do right after week 18
Hmm.
is I'll start quality controlling
Yeah,
the
the
data
data.
from this season.
Right.
And then, like I said, I should have, before the end of week 18, I should be done with my historic study. And then that makes, because there won't be articles next week, leaders of the pack will probably drop off here. And certainly no waiver wire, all 32 will probably be gone as well.
Yeah.
So there won't be any need for looking back at things heading into the playoffs. But we'll certainly bring those. I liked those. I think those article formats work really well during the season. I think we'll bring them back next year.
Good.
Might tweak the tools I'm using.
Hmm.
Instead of last 10 games for spike weeks, I might just look at total spike weeks for the season.
Hmm.
That sort of thing. Might look at total spike weeks over a 2-year span.
Right.
And I don't know. I got to look at that data a little more and see what I can see from it. Not afraid of how the rookies get ranked, because the rookies have an advantage on, if they're really good, they have an advantage on the MVP data.
Right.
If they get off to a hot start, 4 games, they could have an MVP that is exaggerated. And so having a tool that brings them back down to earth a little bit with the
Right.
spike week total might not be bad. Maybe I use half of the spike weeks from the year before, and then the current spike week. I don't know. I've got to play with that data and see what I think. I like the concept, but how to use it, I think last 10 games is a little arbitrary. So I don't know. I don't know if that really, I don't know if there was, the last 10 games was a horse racing thing,
Yes.
like the last 3 races in horse racing. I'm not sure the current form really works in fantasy football as much. I mean, if a guy had, a bunch of spike weeks early in the season and then fell off, does that mean he won't come back? I don't know. I don't know if that really jives. I think our goal is to figure out how many spike weeks is a good number of spike weeks for the whole season. So we'll be looking at that data and trying to break it down. But again, I think those 2 articles were interesting to do for me because they made me think. And I think the way they made me think helped me prepare for the week ahead.
Sounds good, Dennis. Shall we shut this down?
Let's shut it down.